Tonight on the Boland Report, the FBI has foiled a kidnapping plot. The vice presidential debate highlights, as well as a fire that engulfed a South Korean building. All this and more for Thursday, October the 8th, 2020. Good evening. Welcome to the Boland Report. We got tons of stuff to go over today. Let's get right into the latest headlines. The FBI say has foiled a plot to adopt or kidnap and overthrow Michigan Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Ms. Whitmer has become a target of coronavirus skeptics after enacting strict measures that were overturned by a judge last week. Officials say the kidnapping plot included 6 men who planned to hold a treason trial for her. Hatred, bigotry, and violence has no place in Michigan, Mrs. Whitmer said, describing the accused as depraved. According to a sworn FBI affidavit, an undercover law enforcement source attended a June meeting in Idaho where a group of Michigan-based militias members discussed overthrowing state governments that they believe were violating the U.S. Constitution. Several members talked about murdering tyrants or taking a sitting governor. The charged document states, in one video, the suspect disowns the state role in deciding when to reopen gyms during the coronavirus lockdowns. The men met in a basement that was accessed by a trapdoor hidden under a rug, investigators said. Their phones were gathered and placed in another room to avoid secret recordings, but the undercover FBI source was wearing a separate recording device. 13 people were arrested by investigators. 6 men, 5 from Michigan and 1 from Delaware, are accused in federal court of plotting the kidnap. They allegedly planned to hold a treason trial against the governor. Those 6 were named as Adam Fox, Barry Croft, Caleb Franks, Daniel Harris, Brandon Casa, and Ty Gieber. Mr. Gieber, resident in a trailer park, was raided by authority on Wednesday. The other 7 faced charges of terrorism, gang-related offenses in the state court in connection with the alleged abduction plot. They were Paul Baller, Sean Fix, Eric Muller, Michael Knoll, William Knoll, Pete, and Joseph. The group wished to gather about 200 men to storm the Capitol building and take hostages, including the governor. They hope to enact their plan before the November presidential election. If that failed, they plan to attack the governor at her home, officials said. The accused coordinated surveillance of the governor's vacation home, said the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan, adding they were also planned Molotov cocktail attack on police officer, purchased a taser, and pooled their funds to purchase explosives and tactical equipment. The accused held weapons trainings in several states and at times attempted to create bombs, the FBI says, adding that their training was captured on video. Michigan Attorney General Dana Ness said that separate to the kidnapping charges, 7 members of the Wolverine Watchmen militia will be charged by the state with gang affiliation and providing material support to terrorism. She said that the arrested militias hope to start a civil war. Michigan law enforcement officers are united in our commitment to rooting out terrorists in any forms, and we will take swift actions against anyone seeking to cause violence or harm in our state, Coroner Joel Gasper, director of the Michigan State Police, said in a statement announcing charges against the Wolverine Watchmen. In a press conference on Thursday, the governor tied the plot against her to the rhetoric of President Donald Trump, who she said has spent the last several months stoking distrust, fomenting anger, and giving comfort to those who spread fears and hatred and division. The governor pointed to Mr. Trump's failure to explicitly condemn white supremacy at the first presidential debate last week, calling his remark a rallying cry for hate group. He repeatedly condemned such organization in the days after the debate. Joe Biden, who's running for president against Mr. Trump, condemned militia as a genuine threat and said Mr. Trump liberate tweet encouraged militias. The words of the president matter, he said, adding, why can't the president just say stop, 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 stop? Numerous violent incidents have been linked to citizens, malicious groups across the U.S. in recent years. Often, they are white men, sometimes branded weapons during protests. The Department of Homeland Security warned this week in an annual report that violent white supremacy was the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland. Mrs. Whitmer lockdown's order drew thousands of protesters to the state capitol, where many compare her to the German dictator Adolf Hitler. In April, Mr. Trump implied support for the protesters, tweeting, "Liberate Michigan." In May, armed protesters opposed to the lockdown stormed the Capitol State Building. None of us has faced a challenge like COVID-19, Mrs. Whitner said on Thursday. We are not the ones in our enemy. The virus is our enemy. In this country, this enemy is ruthless. 3 hours before the arrest were announced, Mr. Trump has appeared on Fox News, where he condemned Mrs. Whitner as the lockdown queen. What she done to that place is horrible. She locked it up. She got people like living in prison, said Trump. The courts just overturned her. They said what you were doing is unconstitutional. Last Friday, the state Supreme Court ruled that Ms. Whitner did not have the legal authority to issue a emergency executive order that is a responsibility to belongs to the state legislature. Following the ruling, the attorney who argued the case before the top court advised citizens to burn your masks, which health officials say are necessary to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We will be right back after a quick break.
Our nation has gone through a very challenging time this year. But I want the American people to know that from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first.
What you saw was just a portion of the debates from last night. The first and only vice presidential debate between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris. So the coronavirus pandemic dominated the first questions and remarks in the U.S. first presidential on Wednesday night. Republican Mike Pence and Democrat challenger Kamala Harris squared off in Salt Lake City, Utah. The candidates were separated by plastic barriers in an auditorium where any guest who refused to wear a face mask would be removed. Harris condemned Trump's leadership during the worst public health crisis in the century as the greatest failure of any presidential debates in the history of our country. She also declared that she would not take the vaccine if Trump endorsed it without the backing of medical professional. Let's take a look at that clip.
Back to normal. Dr. Anthony Fauci and other experts say that most of the people who can be vaccinated need to be vaccinated. But half of Americans now say they wouldn't take a vaccine if it was released now. If the Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election, should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it, absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Vice
As you saw there, Kamala Harris talked about endorsing the vaccine was approved by medical experts, but she would not take one if Donald Trump recommends one. Pence refused to shift the conversation to the role of the vice president and return to how the Trump administration handled the outbreak. Stop playing politics with people's lives, he said to Harris, stating that certainly there will be a vaccine for COVID-19 by the end of the year. See that clip?
The reality is, when you look at the Biden plan, it reads an awful lot like what President Trump and I and our task force.
Oops, wrong clip.
You to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives. The reality is that we will have a vaccine, we believe, before the end of this year. And it will have the capacity to save countless American lives. And your continuous undermining of confidence in a vaccine.
So candidates typically show up with a quiver of prepared one-liners, and Pence won loose one early. He accused Biden of copying the Trump administration plan to fight the COVID-19, dreading up the charges of plagiarism that helped sink Biden's first presidential run in 1988.
The reality is, when you look at the Biden plan, it reads an awful lot like what President Trump and I and our task force have been doing every step of the way. I mean, quite frankly, when I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a little bit like plagiarism, which is something Joe Biden knows a little bit about.
The conversation then shifted to Trump's taxes, energy policies, and hurricanes and wildfire management. The vice presidential debate normally does not attract as much attention as the presidential one. In 2016, the matchup between Tim Kaine and Pence drew 37 million people, less than half of the viewers who watched Donald Trump face off against Democratic opposition Hillary Clinton. Trump defeated Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. Also to note that the viewership from last night's debate was less than the one from 4 years ago. After Trump tested positive for the COVID-19 last week, however, the two people would be next in line for the president had taken outside significance. For those reasons, the debates it comes as a precarious moment for the Republican in particular, in growing concerns that Trump's position is weakening as more dozen senior officials across the White House, the Pentagon, and inside the campaigns are infected with the virus or in quarantine. Trailing the polls, Trump and Pence has no time to lose. Election day is less than 4 weeks away, and millions of Americans have already casted their ballots by mail-in voting. Harris made history by becoming the first black woman to stand on the vice presidential debate last night. The night offered her a prime opportunity to energize the would-be voters who have shown only modest excitement about Biden, a lifelong politician with mixed records on criminal justice. Harris didn't fully answer the question on whether she and Biden will pack the court if elected. Let's watch that clip.
I think the American people really deserve an answer, Senator Harris. Are you and Joe Biden going to pack the court if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed? I mean, there have been 29 vacancies on the Supreme Court during presidential election years, from George Washington to Barack Obama. Presidents have nominated in all 29 cases. But your party is actually openly advocating adding seats to the Supreme Court, which has had 9 seats for 150 years, if you don't get your way. This is a classic case of if you can't win by the rules, you're going to change the rules. Now, you've refused to answer the question. Joe Biden.
As you saw, so Biden earlier today mentioned that he will unveil his strategy on the court after the election in November.
They'll know my opinion of court packing when the election is over. Now look, I know it's a great question, and I don't blame you for asking it. But you know, the moment I answer that question, the headline in every one of your papers will be about that. Other than focusing on what's happening now.
Harrison, 55, is the daughter of a Jamaican father and an Indian mother. She also is a former prosecutor who pointed to questioning of Trump's appointee and court nominees help her make her a Democratic star. Pence is a 61-year-old former Indiana governor and ex-radio host of Christian, who is known for folksy charm and unwavering loyalty to Trump. Last night during the debate, he talked about being pro-life and serving the president who's one of the most pro-life president in the U.S. He is a Trump biggest defender. The vice president does not share the president's brass tone or undisciplined style. The vice president brought up during the debate Harrison's record as a prosecutor. Let's take a look at that clip.
In San Francisco, when you left office, African Americans were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted for minor drug offenses than whites and Hispanics. When you were Attorney General of California, you increased the disproportionate incarceration of blacks in California. You did nothing on criminal justice reform in California. You didn't lift a finger to pass the First Step Act on Capitol Hill. I mean, the reality is your record speaks for itself. President Trump and I have fought for criminal justice reform.
During the debate, Pence brought up George Floyd, saying that there would be justice in his death.
And with regard to George Floyd, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd. And justice will be served. But there's also no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed. I mean, it really is astonishing. Flora Westbrook is with us here tonight in Salt Lake City. Just a few weeks ago, I stood at what used to be her salon. Was burned to the ground by riots.
Biden was making also reference to the Black Lives Matter riots that occurred earlier in the summer, and talking about the protests in Minneapolis and also Wisconsin. As well, on the issue of transfer of power, Pence mentioned that the Democratic Party has not fully accepted the 2016 election, and he's also made reference to the files that was released earlier this week that was declassified by Donald Trump, and talking about how they haven't accepted the 2016 election. We'll take a look at that clip.
Well, Susan, first and foremost, I think we're going to win this election. Because while Joe Biden and Kamala Harris rattle off a long litany of the establishment in Washington, D.C., an establishment that Joe Biden's been a part of for 47 years, When you talk about accepting the outcome of the election, I must tell you, Senator, your party has spent the last 3.5 years trying to overturn the results of the last election. It's amazing. When Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, the FBI actually spied on President Trump and my campaign. I mean, there were documents released this week that the CIA actually made a referral to the FBI documenting that those allegations were coming from the Hillary Clinton campaign. And of course, we've all seen the avalanche, what you put the country through for the better part of 3 years until it was found that there was no obstruction, no collusion.
Harris' team predicted that she was focused on Trump's year-long effort to downplay the pandemic. The facts are many schools are still closed, and Trump declared that this week he would end talks on a fresh coronavirus economic package till after the election. Harris also explained her view on law enforcement, area which irks some progressive, given her past as a prosecutor. The candidates was on stage, 6.3 meters apart, by plexiglass barriers. Both candidates released updated showing that they were tested negative for the coronavirus yesterday. Critics suggest that Pence should not be at the debate at all. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said earlier today that his government is bracing for potential disruption if the U.S. election are not clear. During an event announced funding for electric vehicle production today, Trudeau said he wanted watch only clips from the televised presidential vice presidential debates. He said his focus is squarely on keeping Canadians safe during the pandemic, but also adding that the government is also tracking political developments south of the border and their impacts on Canada. I think we'll certainly hope for a smooth transition or a clear result from the election like many people are around the world, Trudeau said. If it's less clear, there may be some disruption and that we need to be ready for any outcomes. And I think that what Canadians would expect of their government, and we are certainly reflecting on that. President Trump has questioned integrity of the November 3rd election and mail-in ballots as he's refused to commit to a peaceful transition if he loses. Trudeau refused from commenting directly on how the presidential campaign is unfolding. Of course, what has happened in the States is going to impact Canada after the election, but our job is to be ready for all outcomes, as you know. As a matter of course, I don't comment or weigh in on American political process, he said. Trudeau did not say the steps the government is taking to be ready for those outcomes. A senior Liberal speaking on Condition Anonymous told CBC News the government's preparation are focused on the policy implication of either Trump or Biden winning, and on the possibility, given the change in voting procedure driven by the pandemic, the winner in the election might not be immediately clear. Last week, Trudeau urged politicians at all strips to unite the fight against COVID-19 after Trump tested positive following months of downplaying the pandemic. Trudeau said during the pandemic has grown a political lightning rod in the States. Obvious there is an election going on in the States where the states are approaching on COVID-19 has been polarized political issue, he said. In Canada, we have been extremely lucky that it has not. There has been concentrated effort across the order of government, across political parties to work together to be there for Canadians and get this virus under control. We certainly going to continue with that in Canada. We recommend it as the path for people around the world. Wednesday evening, vice presidential debate focused largely on Trump's administration's response to the global pandemic, with Vice President Mike Pence defending his action that he claimed saved thousands of lives, while Democratic challenger Senator Harris condemned Washington's pandemic response as the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. Trudeau, who was holding a joint event with with Ontario Premier Doug Ford today, that the pandemic has drawn the two former political adversaries together to help Canadians get through the health and economic crisis. Government across the country of wherever political strip all want the same thing: to keep people safe, to bring our economy back as quickly as possible, and to support those of community into the future, the Prime Minister said. On that, Premier Ford and I and all other find common ground. Trump is ready to return. When we come back, we're going to have the latest updates on the U.S. election, as we got more stories from that. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Trump is ready to return to public events. U.S. Presidential Donald Trump has completed his course of treatment for COVID-19 and is ready to return to public engagement this weekend, said his doctor. Dr. Sheen Coney said that the president shall have responded extremely well to the medication and remains stable. Trump earlier pulled out of next Thursday's TV debate with Democratic rival Joe Biden after organizers said it would have to be a virtual event. Trump said in a video posted on social media, standing in front of the White House, that he's planning to release the similar drugs that he had for all Americans, and the government has an emergency stockpile ready in place. Let's take a watch of that clip.
We are making tremendous progress with this horrible disease that was sent over by China. China will pay a big price for what they did to the world and to us. But we have medicines right now, and I call them a cure. I went into the hospital a week ago. I was very sick, and I took this medicine, and it was incredible. It was incredible. I could have walked out the following day sooner. It was incredible the impact it had. And we're going to make that and others that are similar to it, almost identical, we're going to make them available immediately. We have an emergency use authorization that I want to get signed immediately. The FDA has moved at a level that they've never moved before. Things that would take 2, 3, 4 years are taking a matter of...
The move, so the debate cancellation has sparked a row on how and when further debates can take place. In a memo released by the White House on Thursday evening, Dr. Coney said Mr. Trump was displaying no signs to suggest progressive illness. Saturday would be day 10 since last Thursday diagnosis, and based on the of the advanced diagnosis, the team has been conducting a fully expect the President safe return to public engagement at that time, the memo added. On Thursday, the commission organizing the second presidential debate in Miami on October 15 said it will take place remotely because Trump has tested positive for the coronavirus. In response, Mr. Trump said he was not going to waste my time on a virtual debate. At the moment, it appeared that the debate could take place on October 22nd, although it could remain to be seen. The first presidential debate on September 29th had descended into insults. The vice president debate held on Wednesday night between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris was more measurable affair. The U.S. election will be held on November 3rd. Latest opinion poll suggests that Mr. Biden has a high single-digit lead nationally, but that outcome is often decided in battleground states, where the races can be much closer. It began with the Commission on Presidential Debate announcing candidates who would take part in the Miami debate from separate remote locations to protect the health and safety of all. This infuriated the president, who said in a phone interview with Fox Business Channel that he was not prepared to sit behind a computer. Ridiculous. Joe Biden said the president changed his mind every second. That his campaign team added that Mr. Trump clearly does not want to face questions from the voters. The Trump campaign answered back with manager Bill Stedman saying that the commission decision to rush to Joe Biden's defense was patent, and adding that Mr. Trump would hold a rally instead on the same date. The Biden team then proposed a town hall-style debate set for Miami should go ahead on October 22nd instead. They brought a brief moment of agreement on the date at last. However, the Trump team said there should be a third face-to-face debate on October 29th, just 5 days before polling. But the Biden team said the debate should only be scheduled on the 3 days already agreed on, September 29th, October 15th, and October 22nd. On October 15th, Mr. Biden will now take part on his own primetime event answering questions from voters. Quite what format any Biden-Trump debate takes place is hard to pin down. Addressing the issue himself, Mr. Trump said, "I'm back because I'm in perfect physical specimen." He said that he stopped taking most therapeutic, but was still taking steroids and would be tested for COVID again soon. But although his doctor said he's now have no symptoms, questions still remain when the president first became infected and whether he could be still contagious. Although the names of many people who has interacted with the president tested positive are known to be, if remained unclear. How many were exposed at the White House? New COVID safety measures are in place.
When we hear people saying I'm young and I'm a perfect specimen, instead of addressing the fact that 50,000 people were infected, reported to be infected yesterday, nearly 1,000 people died. What are we talking about here? Tomorrow, by the way, come here tomorrow. We're going to be talking about the 25th Amendment, but not to take attention away from the subject we have now.
Nancy Pelosi and the House Speaker has announced a plan to create a commission to review whether Donald Trump is capable of carrying out his presidential duties or should face removal from the office. The office of the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, announced on a Friday press conference about the bill after she expressed concern that Trump, who's under treatment for coronavirus, is suffering disassociation from reality. The president has unleashed erratic and self-contradicting tweets and declarations in recent days that have left staff scrambling and raised concerns over his stability. In a zigzagging interview on the Fox Business Channel on Thursday, his first since being hospitalized, Trump said before boasting, "I'm back because I'm in perfect physical specimen and I'm extremely young. That's why I'm lucky to be in that way." Pelosi, who's negotiating a COVID-19 economic stimulus plan, responded to her weekly press conference. The plan isn't for the president to say that he's in perfect physical specimen. Specimen, maybe I can agree with that. And young, he said he was young. Pelosi, who was negotiating. Trump is, shall we say, in an altered state right now, and the dissociation from reality would be funny if it wasn't so deadly, the 80-year-old speaker adding while wearing a mask. Trump reacted angrily to Pelosi maneuver, tweeting, "Crazy Nancy is the one should be under observation. They don't call her crazy for nothing." A virus spread through a high-rise apartment building in South Korea port early Friday, causing minor injuries to scores of people, officials said. Footage from the scene in the city shows a huge ball of orange flame soaring up the 33rd floor building and shooting through the roof as firefighter tries to put out the blaze from below. There was no immediate reports of deaths or serious injuries. Hundreds of residents fled as the fire broke out while workers rescued another 77 who had escaped to the roof of other places. The South Korean military, the Interior, and Safety said at least 88 people were treated for minor injuries and such scratches and lightly inhaling smoke. Officials are investigating the cause of the fire, which they said was nearly put out as a 9 a.m. local time. When we come back, the latest COVID-19 updates and global news. Welcome back to the show. Alarm bells are ringing louder and louder as the number of new COVID-19 cases grow increasingly higher, the Ontario top doctor warns. At a news conference, Dr. David Williams, the provincial health medical officer of health, told reporters there was growing cause for concern over the rise of novel coronavirus cases, and to stay tuned about public health measure as cases rise and possibility rate goes up. What those additional health measures might look like and when could they take effect, Williams wouldn't say. When the time is right, I'm sure the Minister and Premier will be forthcoming, he said. Asked if he would recommend closing indoors dining, Williams didn't recommend directly, saying he has only made recommendation from the public health table, which are up to the Cabinet for their consideration. With the Thanksgiving weekend law approaching, Williams focused on the need for Ontarians to take advice from the public health officials seriously, avoiding gathering, observing physical distancing, and mask wearing. The average age associated with the COVID-19 outbreaks are growing younger, but novel coronavirus is also striking again in vulnerable population, he said. The positive rate during the second wave is up to 2.1% on average, he said, but closer to 3% average in Toronto, Pierre region, and Ottawa. Outside those hotspot, cases are rising in the regions of Halton, York, Dunman, and other parts. The number of people with the Ontario Hospital with confirmed cases of COVID continue a steady climb upwards with up to 206 from 195. Of those, 96 are being treated in intensive care units, while 29 on ventilators. Some will say those numbers are small numbers, Dr. Williams said, but just starting the curve rising up. Also rising is the number of outbreaks in the province facing, totaling 112 on Thursday, almost double what it was 2 weeks ago, with more cases in vulnerable sectors and schools. Those outbreaks aren't occurring in hotspot regions, but also in areas like Moncton, Waterloo, and Eastern Ontario, Williams said. Contact tracing is also growing more challenging as people are apparently ignoring their advice to limit their social circles, Williams said, with the number of close contact as high as 50 to 100 in a single week. Tracing was easier when Ontario was under lockdown, he acknowledged, expressing frustration that some people are engaging in such risky behaviors. I don't understand why. Why would you have that kind of thing? What you don't understand about her messaging? Asked the visibly upset William. Many experts have criticized the Ontario government COVID-19 messaging in recent weeks as confusing and contradictory information arguing is leading to some public mistrust of the provincial advice. Shane Mullen described his addiction to opiates as a session of fatal attraction. A survival of childhood abuse, he began using drugs and alcohol as a teenager to mask his pain. As the years went by, he developed a $400 a day heroin habit and was in and out of jail committing crime. To feed his addiction, drugs became an escape from his trauma. Opioid gave him the most relief. His body began to break down. He developed a heart infection and was sure he would die like so many of his friends on the streets. As his mental health began to fail, he desperately wanted to quit. He tried aspirin, Suboxone, and menthol, and spent time in a detox center. None of his treatment helped appeal his addiction until he became a patient at Edmonton Injectable Opioid Treatment Clinic. The treatment is considered a last resort for those living with the most severe opioid addiction. Mana is among the 7 Albertarites struggling with the substance abuse who have filed a lawsuit against the provincial government for discontinuing IO treatment in the province. Clinics in Edmonton and Calgary offering the treatment are set to close next spring after the province cut their funding, which ends March 31st. The statement of the claim, filed September 30th in Edmonton Court of Queen's Bench, alleging that the closing of the clinic infringed on the patient's shared rights by putting their lives and personal security in peril. It also contends that the denying addicts access to life-saving treatment account the discrimination. The lawsuit calls on the court to halt the closures and maintain current and future patients. None of the allegations have been proven in court. My life was saved by the IO program, said for me, fentanyl was a love affair, a obsession, bondage, a mental deadbolt that's ultimately turned into a fatal attraction that's destroyed everything in its path, including my liver, my vital organs, and ultimately could have been my life. IO changed that. It helped me maintain my life, became stable again. Without those forms of treatment, people will continue to die. IO treatment delivers pharmaceutical-grade opiates via a syringe rather than pill. Patient inject hydromorphine a medical-grade opioid 3 times daily under the supervision of the nurse. Clients enroll in the program are offered psychological, financial, and housing support. Injection treatment is only offered to people with severe long-term addiction when other treatment prove inefficient. The clinics were set up by the 2-year pilot program announced by the previous NDP government in late 2017. The Calgary clinic opened in October 2018. A Edmonton clinic opened in May 2019. Together, they once served more than 200 patients. A $14 million grant for the program was set to expire in March 2020, but the United Conservative Party government elected in April 2019 renewed it for another year to transition patients to other forms of treatment. The government had no plans to extend the pilot. Premier Jason Kenney suggested that the harm reduction model only serves to condemn and not add it to an endless cycle of abuse. In a statement issued Thursday, the press secretary to Jason La, the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addiction, said patients are being safely transitioned out of the pilot program. The province said its remaining confidence in the transition work will be completed by the end of 2021 or March 2021. To be clear, clients of the pilot study are able to access similar treatment through that of Alberta Mental Health Services at 10 opiate discriminant clinics. More than 40% of the active IO clients have already successfully transitioned to other appropriate treatment office, Kat said in a statement to CBC News. The lawsuits details the lives of 11 addicts, each consumed by their own trauma. Some experienced childhood abuse and homelessness, and have cycled in and out of foster home, prison cells, and treatment. Some has overdosed numerous times. One of the plaintiffs is a former elite swimmer who became addicted to pain medication after spine injuries in his teens. Another, a 60 scoop survivor, was mentally and physically abused by her adopted family. Another plaintiff survived the residential schools and lost his own son to a fentanyl overdose before enrolling in the program. The statement claims some of the program's patients had already returned to using street drugs. The plaintiff suffers from the most severe form of opioid use disorder, which left untreated will result in serious adverse health and effects, including premature death, it says. To avoid a abrupt and potentially life-threatening transition from IO to street opiate use, some IO patients had resumed street opiate use in a gradual manner to safely help with their transition off IO. In doing so, IO patients are exposing themselves to dangers associated with street drugs. The statement filed weeks after the more than 600 frontline workers and patient advocate issue an open letter calling for the province to maintain funding for both IO buildings. The opiate crisis continued to ascend its toll on Alberta. The secondary warned that and the ongoing toll of the pandemic includes the increased presence of contaminated street drugs have left addicts especially vulnerable. Edmonton lawyer who's recommended the plaintiff pro bono said closing the program will result in overdose deaths. She said about 100 patients are currently enrolled in the program, and there's currently a waiting list. He said the decision to close, to provide or deny services could be left to medical professional. How many people have to die before you can assist? Is your ideally worth it? The lawyer mentioned at a press conference Thursday. 3 Albertarites are dying each day, and each one of those Albertarites could be saved by the IO. Then when should we allow this program to continue? He is seeking an emergency injunction that would prevent the IO patient from being denied the treatment until the lawsuit concludes. When we come back, we've got some final stories, including a good heart story. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. We have a good heart story. It's been a rough couple of nights after a Wilburn week, and Gordon Pitt, who was coming down off a bender, had a lot on his mind. It was July. He was being told to shred the shed that he's been living behind a church on 108th Avenue near Wally Boulevard in Surrey. First as a squatter, and later, after gaining the trust of the parish president as a guest, was a fire hazard and he was forced to move. Even on a good day, it would be a lot for Pete to process. The day was shaping up to be anything but good. But as he was coming out of his daze, he heard a woman's voice that sounded like his deceased mother, and everything changed. I heard, Gordon, is that you? Just like my mother used to say. It took me a couple seconds to realize what was happening, what was going on. She popped around the corner. I was just lit up. It was his sister, Chris Zemla, who he hasn't seen in 22 years. It's hard to explain walking up to someone who you haven't seen for that long. It was really, really difficult to see how he lived, Zemla said. I could tell what his lifestyle has done to him. Back in March, Bruce had the parish president for the Ukrainian Holy Cross Catholic Church in Surrey found out that someone was squatting in a shed on the church property. One of the parishioners spotted a mystery man sweeping the parking lot. Hetcha discovered that Pete has been chasing away thieves and keeping the ground clean. So he started giving him odd jobs to do for cash. He was so impressed with his work ethic that the peer asked the church leadership if they would fix up those house on the property for Pete to live in. The house was deemed uninhabitable. There was mold issues, and it wasn't going to happen. He said, "We started asking what other kind of solution we can come with for Gordon." In early July, had to see Gordon at the shed to discuss housing options, and he saw him talking to a woman he didn't recognize. Both of them were almost in tears. Gordon was like, "Bruce, you won't believe who was here. This is my sister." So I got some final thoughts on the vice presidential debate from last night. How it compares to the first presidential debate that happened September 29th. As you guys know, the vice presidential debate was last night. The display of compassion between both candidates, Mike Pence and Kamala Harris, was really showing and really positive. The respect that Mike Pence had to her was really huge, and I think that made an impact on the voters' decision. But mind you, Kamala Harris said some things that were just like false, including saying that the Biden-Harris administration will not ban fracking. In reality, there's been clips showing that her and Biden has mentioned that they would ban fracking, including a clip that was aired on CNN. As you guys know, the first presidential debate was very heated. Let's take a look at that clip from that debate on September 29th.
I can answer the question
Why
because
wouldn't you answer that
because
question?
the question
you want to
is
put a lot
the
of new
question
Supreme Court
is
justice,
the
radical
question,
left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
This
Who's
is
on your
so
list?
right,
Gentlemen, I think
As you see, the spark, the huge difference between the first debate on the presidential, and as well as this one. Let's play this clip from the vice presidential debate from last night.
Our nation has gone through a very challenging time this year. But I want the American people to know that from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first. Before, there were more than 5 cases in the United States, all people who had returned.
As you see, the whole debate was, the vice presidential debate was, both candidates were able to bring their facts out to the public, their opinion, what they would do, their platform. There was almost a clear platform. The questions were answered, and that was an awesome debate. Unlike the insults that occurred on the 29th,
Why didn't you do it over the last 25 years?
Because you weren't
Why didn't you do it over
Because
the
you
last
weren't
25
president
years?
screwing things up.
You were a senator. And
You're
by
the
way,
worst
you were a
president
vice-
America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
let me just tell you, Joe. I've done more in.
as you see there, there was a stark contrast between the debates. And I really hope that for the next week debate on October 15th, that I really hope it is in person, and President Trump is well and healthy, that he's tested negative for the COVID-19, that the next presidential debate will be respectful, that both candidates are able to put forth their ideas, their platform, so that the American voters who are in the middle can decide. That's all for the final thoughts. Thank you for watching the Boland Report. This has been a long show today. As normal, follow WNews Network on social media for the latest news, as well as visit WNews Network for the latest news, weather, and more. Want to give you guys a quick programming note for tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be airing at 11:30 a.m. Just a special midday 30-minute update in the morning, as well as on Monday, which is Thanksgiving in Canada, the Boland Report will air at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. We will provide some Thanksgiving trivia on Monday. See y'all tomorrow. Have an awesome rest of your evening, and see you tomorrow morning.